Welcome to Raw Politique. We're living in a time of manufactured scarcity and engineered division, where billionaires dodge taxes while basic rights are under attack. Dissent is criminalized and workers are squeezed in every direction. From Gaza to Glasgow, repression is normalized and global capitalism tightens its grip behind trade wars and rising tariffs. In moments like these, its voice is rooted in the labor movement and in the solidarity that offer clarity. Len McCluskey is one of those voices. As the former Secretary General of Unite, the union, the UK's second largest trade union, he's been on the front lines of workers' struggles for decades. Today on Raw Politique, we speak to him about the state of labor, the failure of political leadership, and where the fight for justice must go from here. Len, welcome to Raw Politique. I'd like to kick off by hearing your opinion on Keir Starmer and particularly his positioning on Gaza. Roger Waters has accused him of being complicit in genocide. Can you speak to that as well as his approach regarding workers' rights and the broader shift away from Labour's traditional base?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a worrying time. I joined the Labour Party in 1970. In fact, it was Tony Benn who inspired me to join the party. I lived in Wigan at the time in the north of England. But I left the party at the last elections, kind of auto-expulsion, because I supported Jeremy Corbyn in the Islington North election, and of course he was running against an official Labour candidate, and so you automatically expel yourself from the Labour Party. I was happy to do it, to be honest, because unfortunately the Labour Party has taken a dramatic and quite historical turn. And if you'll just bear with me for a minute or two, since the inception of the Labour Party 120 years ago, it has been the voice of ordinary working people. It's been the voice of organised labour. And of course, the battle has raged inside the party between the right and the left ever since. But it had a legitimacy to be the voice of ordinary working people. And that's borne out by the fact that hundreds of millions of working people have voted Labour over those 120 years. During that time, there's been periods where the right wing of the party have been in dominance, and that's been the majority of the time. And the left wing have been marginalised, even under the Blair years. It was marginalised, but we were still very much there and had an organisation, a leadership, and an opposition to whatever right-wing policies were being pursued. That has changed dramatically. In 2017, when Jeremy Corbyn almost came to power, and those people who say, no, he never came to power. He was whatever it was, seats behind. The fact of the matter is that had the Tories in 2017 lost 5 more seats to Labour, just 5 seats, then Labour would have formed a minority government. Corbyn would have been in number 10. Corbyn would have been the Prime Minister. The establishment were horrified by that. Absolutely horrified. Both sides, you can imagine them meeting in their clubs and their executive rooms in the UK and saying to themselves, how did this happen? How has this man got so close? And you can imagine their counterparts in America saying, hey guys, how have you allowed this to happen? They took a decision in 2017 to destroy Jeremy Corbyn, to destroy Corbynism, and never, ever to allow it to happen again. And they have a willing puppet in terms of Keir Starmer. They are attempting to turn the Labour Party into a mirror image of the Democrat Party in America. So they are not just seeking to marginalize the left in the Labour Party, they are seeking to expel the left. Hundreds of thousands of people have already left, but those leading activists who are in any way on the left are being expelled, forced out. We've currently got about 7 left MPs who are suspended. And so to answer your question, what is happening in Labour is absolutely extraordinary. Labour have now shed the legitimacy to be the voice of ordinary working people. They are no longer the voice of ordinary working people. And that's why, of course, literally millions of ordinary working people have deserted Labour. And it's a very, very worrying time. But also, I suppose every cloud has a silver lining, because there are literally, and I mean literally, hundreds of thousands of people who are desperate for an alternative. And it won't come as a surprise to you or anybody else listening to know that people are debating and discussing the need for another political voice to emerge, which will represent ordinary working people, the same that it did 120 years ago. People came together and said, you know what, we don't have a voice in the political arena anymore. And it was from that the Labour Party was formed. Well, a similar thing is happening now, because Starmer and his team simply do not represent the ideals, the aspirations, the beliefs, the fears, and the concerns of ordinary working people. It is very worrying. And every time I switch the television on or open a newspaper, there's another decision that they've taken which simply confirms that they are abandoning that territory that has been Labour's territory for so long. It is a sinister plot by the establishment to create a Democrat Party, a mirror image of the Democrat Party in the States, and so that there is no soul anymore. There's no heart in the Labour Party that represents that socialist tendency.
As if the Democratic Party is something to model, whereas in fact it's not. I mean, I think, to summarize, you've said that the Labour Party is no longer a vehicle for working class interests. It's been largely captured by establishment politics. It's expelled principled voices like Diane Abbott and others. So given all that, is it truly time now to consider the formation of a new centre-left political party, perhaps grounded in more youth and community figures like Zara Sultana, and perhaps supported by veterans like Jeremy, who you've referred to, and John and others?
Oh, without a doubt. Without me giving too much away, watch this space. The fact is that, and this won't come as a surprise, for the past 2 years, there has been debates and discussions taking place. Once Jeremy Corbyn was suspended by Starmer, and I was deeply involved right after the suspension, a number of senior left colleagues came together on a Zoom. I was asked by them to go and see whether Starmer was looking for a war or was he looking for some kind of solution. I met with him and Angela Rayner and his chief of staff, Morgan Sweeney. Along with me was John Trickett, a good left comrade MP. And to cut a long story short, we reached an agreement in order to allow Jeremy Corbyn the suspension to be lifted and for us to all get back to normal. It was done on the basis of, if Jeremy would agree, a statement, a specific statement, and that was thrashed out with Keir and his chief of staff and with ourselves. Jeremy agreed to the statement, the suspension was lifted, everyone breathed a sigh of relief, and literally within hours, Keir Starmer withdrew the Labour whip. Quite despicable, quite disgraceful. I lost any trust in him. I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him. And of course, Jeremy has been out of the Labour Party ever since, and now, as you know, is an independent. So, yes, I feel fairly confident that a new political party will emerge. And I'll tell you for why, Mary, one of the other most important reasons. As Labour disillusioned people, working people begin to move away from them, come an election, who are working people going to turn to? What alternatives do they have? The Tories are a shamble, the Liberals are what they normally are, neither here nor there. And that's precisely why thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people are flocking towards reform. A right-wing neo-racist organisation. But working people have got nowhere else to go. And that's why it's desperate that at some juncture, ordinary working people who are disillusioned with Labour are given the opportunity to at least have another radical party on the left to look towards.
Well, when you do have something to announce, please let us know so we can have a deeper discussion on that. And we at Realpolitik are obviously huge fans of Jeremy. Him and I go way back. So I'm excited to hear what may come to be. And definitely we need to be talking about reform in a moment. But before we do that, let's turn to the unions. Obviously, you have a legacy within the unionist movement. And, you know, those of us who are in the Arab world fighting this genocide, we look at unions, especially in the UK, and say, you know, why is there this deafening silence when it comes to Gaza and the international law violations that we're seeing and the suppression of dissent? We want to see the union voices being stronger. And maybe you can explain to us why we're not seeing that.
That's difficult for me to do. And let me try and explain that as sensitively as I can. When I was General Secretary of Unite, in a sense, I was the leader of the left in the trade union movement, and I had an opportunity to bring together not only the left general secretaries of some of the unions, but also some of the larger unions in order to try to make certain that we had a common voice. Unfortunately, that isn't there anymore. There is no coordinated left approach within the unions. And to be honest, that's allowed Keir Starmer to literally do what he wants. You asked me before about his role in Gaza. Despicable. This is a human rights lawyer, a so-called human rights lawyer, who agreed with the situation of a barricade of medicine, food, water going into Gaza to assist women and children and indeed everyone. A human rights lawyer, absolutely disgraceful. And of course, his position, that of the Labour Party, and because of the silence of some of the unions, not all, I mean, there are honourable exceptions, but because of the silence, the situation has been allowed to worsen. There is absolutely no doubt that the worst thing that's happening in our world today is what's happening to the Palestinians, not only in Gaza, by the way, but in the West Bank. I mean, look, I feel very, very passionate about this, as any decent people would be. Someone once said that for evil to prosper, good men and women must stand silent. Well, there are hundreds of millions of people, thankfully, around the world who are not standing silent. But, Mary, there are many millions of people who are standing silent, and they will be called to account by history. History will account for those people who were either complicit in the genocide that's taken place and the atrocities that are taking place, or simply stayed silent. Absolutely disgraceful. And I come from a position that I've always supported the Palestinian cause, but I come from a position that says, look, what happened on October the 7th, I condemn. I condemn Hamas for what happened on that day. It was an atrocity, but it's an atrocity that's been taking place for decades. In the last 2 years, over 1,000 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank by Israeli thugs who are regarded as settlers, who start to intimidate, pressure, bring fear, murder, kill, chase people out of the villages and then take it over. And what does the West do? Not only the West, by the way, what is the world doing, allowing this to happen? It's absolutely despicable. Starmer and the Labour Party should be ashamed. They simply follow what the Americans and what Trump and the Americans do. Of course, they could stop it like that, but they don't. It is despicable what is going on. And all we can desperately hope for is that the voice of the millions and millions of ordinary people, including, incidentally, in Tel Aviv, they're my heroes, the Jewish people in Tel Aviv who are out on the streets condemning what Netanyahu, this criminal, is actually doing in their name. And you can only hope that somehow a change comes about to give some form of liberation to the Palestinians. It's quite despicable and disgraceful what my government. I'll say this to you as well. When I hear the kind of crocodile tears and the declaration of, yes, we agree with a two-state solution. Well, two things on that. They agree with a two-state solution. Why doesn't the British government recognise Palestine as a state now? Why don't we recognise Israel? Why don't we recognise Palestine now and set up the normal diplomatic relationships and embassies, etc.? It's outrageous. It's disgraceful. I've always believed in a two-state solution myself, although some years back, because of the hypocrisy, I kind of moved away from that, and I was somewhat ambivalent. Well, why don't we have a one-state solution? Why don't we give everybody in that area a vote and see what happens? One person, one vote, see what happens. Because the continuation of the abuse of the Palestinians is absolutely criminal.
No, thank you for that. And I think, these discussions about the two-state solution versus the one-state solution don't seem to have any meaning right now when we are actually witnessing the real-time erasure of the Palestinian people immediately in Gaza, but like you rightfully said, in the occupied West Bank as well. And the question is, why doesn't the UK, especially given its historic responsibility, why does it not recognize Palestine? That's one question. And certainly there is complicity charges that will be raised against Starmer and his colleagues. And today, I'm sure you saw in The Guardian, there's been a case launched against 10 British Israeli nationals for war crimes. So I think the legal efforts are coming together, but they're just not coming together fast enough. And of course, there's this issue of implementation. I mean, the ICJ advisory opinions have been completely ignored. We see that Hungary is removing itself from the International Criminal Court. So then, in your view, as someone who's been around for a long time in these spaces, what is left of international law? Where are the accountability mechanisms that we can use?
Well, again, remember, for 7 decades, what's been happening in Israel with the Palestinians is against international law. The United Nations have condemned and continue to condemn. But the problem is, because of the nature of global politics, It's they know that they can get away with anything. And of course, once that happens, it breeds around the world in places like Hungary and other right-wing arenas a belief that says, well, let's just do what we like. Let's whether we're committing crimes against international law. Well, who cares? Because so long as we've got the backing of America, we can do what we like. And that is the challenge to those good people who believe in democracy, who believe in justice and fairness and decency. That's the challenge that is now presented to all of us.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, do you believe that the trade unions should give the Starmer government a bit more time?
I personally don't, but
because one of my questions was going to be, should the trade unions still be financially and politically supporting the Labour Party, which clearly backs a right-wing agenda and fails to speak up for justice? Wouldn't it make sense now, and even, over the past couple of months, for that support to have been withdrawn?
No, it's all about timing, Mary. And the reality, of course, at the moment is that if not all trade unions, of course, are affiliated to the Labour Party. There's only, I think it's 12. But without an alternative, the issue really for trade unions, trade union leaders, trade union activists, and remember, there are a number of trade unions on the centre-right of politics who support Starmer, some of the bigger unions where the leadership supports Starmer. So it's not an easy situation. And I mentioned before, and this is a sadness from me, there is no left leadership in the unions. There is to coordinate a left response. Individual left unions do their own thing. So it's all about timing. And only when there's a credible alternative and the disillusionment mounts with Labour will there be serious debate about disaffiliation from Labour. I remember my union, when I was General Secretary, we were the largest donors to the Labour Party. Now, of course, under Jeremy Corbyn, that was quite welcome. But under previous leaders like Ed Miliband and indeed Starmer now, yes, there was always a debate and a discussion about, is it time for us to disaffiliate? But you need to have an alternative of what you're going to do in terms of disaffiliation. And I do believe that politics is incredibly fluid at the moment. If there was a general election tomorrow, Labour would not win. Labour would lose their majority. Reform would pick up a huge amount of seats. And what coalitions would then take place is anybody's guess. So it's a very fluid situation at the moment. And like always in politics, you have to, the timing is everything.
I think you would agree that there is wide support for left-wing policy, but also there is this absence of leadership. So sort of zooming out from the unions for a moment, we actually had a great conversation with Vijay Prashad about the state of the left today. So the question is, do you agree that there is an absence of leadership on the left? And if so, where should that leadership come from?
Oh, there's undoubtedly an absence of left leadership. And it's also a fact that the right-wing media in the UK have already, they desperately fall over themselves to obliterate 2017 from our memories. They talk about 2019 general election. Corbynism was battered. Corbynism was defeated. The truth of the matter is the 2019 general election was about one thing and one thing only, and that was Brexit. The Tories won a landslide victory by saying three words: get Brexit done. You never heard Boris Johnson or the Tories say anything else other than get Brexit done. 2017, on the other hand, 2017 was a clear vindication that millions and millions of people desperately voted in favour of left-wing policies. Again, the media would tell us, oh, ordinary British people are not interested in left-wing policies. 2017 proved that that wasn't the case at all. More people voted for Jeremy Corbyn in England than voted for Tony Blair. The massive support for Corbyn, even now, wherever Corbyn goes now, he's loved. He draws hundreds, thousands to meetings. There is a desperate wish for left-wing politics. The lack of leadership is the issue. And that's why I say that a credible alternative party would need to have that ability to inspire and draw people in a way that, for example, in a way that Farage has done for reform.
I think again of this piece by Owen Jones on Farageism. And the question is, so reform is now polling ahead of the Tories. Shocking. Are there any lessons that the left can learn about strategy, narrative, and urgency from reform?
In this regard, so, I mean, obviously, we've all been brought up from the with the mantra of no rank and fileism and grassroots, and leadership has got to come from the grassroots, and leadership will emerge. I understand that. The truth of the matter is, if you look at how things can take off, you've only got to look at leaders sometimes. Tony Blair was a charismatic leader. So, unfortunately, it was Margaret Thatcher. I normally spit when I mention her name, but I won't. Corbyn, charismatic, drew people. And what we can learn is when if you hear me mention the word credible once, you'll hear me mention it 1,000 times. What is important is, yes, the leadership team. You know, you mentioned Dora Sultana before. What a fantastic person she is. What a one. I see her being a future leader. I see her emerging in a very positive sense in the future. But in order to make a new political narrative, yes, we can learn from reform in certain ways. I mean, their success is born purely and simply on immigration and nothing else. And they will get exposed in a general election. They'll be put under pressure to come up with answers. And unfortunately, Mary, people say to me, oh, yeah, there'll be nothing because they'll get exposed. My personal belief is they will come up with answers. And the answers they come up with will be horrifying. And my fear is that if dog whistle politics has caught the narrative and the pulse of ordinary people, then God knows where we'll end up. Hence the need for a credible, realistic alternative.
Thank you for that. So I have a question for you. You've mentioned that times are bleak, but you've also mentioned that you're an optimist. What examples of resistance or solidarity have inspired you recently?
Recently, well, to be honest, I've been inspired all my life by direct action. So, you know, I look at, there's a whole host of things that happen within community organisations. I mentioned before that literally all over the country, there are groups that have been created in the communities who are now networking. And some of the work that they are doing is inspirational, absolutely inspirational. I look at Extinction Rebellion and what they did out on the streets, bringing to the top of the agenda the whole issue of climate change. UK Uncut was an organisation that I had the privilege to deal with when I was the General Secretary. This was a group of people who just decided, look, why are we moaning about things over a pint? Why don't we do something? And they were fantastic in bringing, for example, tax evasion. You mentioned at the outset about the billionaires and incredible things that they did. So direct action is an important thing to me. I look to the likes of Tower Hamlets in London, the largest borough, where the mayor, Lutfer Ayman, was expelled by the Labour Party, stopped from running. And he said, OK, well, I best run as an independent. Not only won the mayoral seat, but then he created a party, Aspire, and they won the council. And that's because they went out to ordinary people and touched the pulse. And so I do see these things happening. And the real key for us is to join them together and make it a national voice that people can sit up and say, I like what they're saying.
And then added to that, those international linkages that show us that really our struggles are united. So that's when we become more and more powerful, that compounding effect of realizing that I am you and me, and we will not take this lightly. We refuse the tide that's leading us to fascism. We refuse to see people as lower than us.
Mary, I often used to say in speeches that when ordinary working people join hands across nations and across oceans, anything is possible. I've been involved in so many international campaigns in my life, from child of the 60s and anti-Vietnam wars. I was deeply involved in the anti-apartheid movement, and eventually we had the release of Mandela, the Chile Solidarity campaign, where eventually Pinochet was destroyed. I was deeply involved in the Miami Five, or the Cuban Five, who were arrested illegally and imprisoned, and we fought to get them out. And we did that by making certain that the American unions, because one of our campaigns was to break the silence, because in America, nobody had really heard of them, including the trade union movement. And we went out to America to speak to our brothers and sisters. And as a result, they put pressure on Obama and they were released. So there's so many instances where working people coming together with the same commonality and of fighting for justice can be successful. And I believe that passionately.
Thank you, Len. I think your words could really resonate with people, with activists who may be feeling disillusioned right now when the crisis seems so large. Or your words could also resonate with someone who feels politically homeless, like there's nothing really they can attach to. So on that note, Len, if there's anything else you would like to end with, please do.
I only very quickly. I'm looking at what's happening with Trump's tariffs at the moment, where capitalism has turned in on itself and it's fighting each other. So it's almost like thieves falling out with each other, and people talking about, is this the end of globalization? The markets are all over the place. They don't know where they're coming from or what they're doing. And so, yes, my message to ordinary American people is don't give up. Don't give up. Things can change in an instant. And I'm a great believer in workers' power. I'm a great believer that decency, which is inherent in all of us, will come to the forefront, and keep fighting, because that will bring us all of the goodness that we've had in the past, our mothers and fathers, and fighting for a better world and dying for a better world. And we have to do the same and believe that we can overcome these difficulties and challenges that we currently have.
Len, thank you for the inspiration. Thank you for the belief. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Mary. It's been my privilege and pleasure.